Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. How is the new Afghan government created by the Taliban viewed in Islamabad? And what is the precise nature of the relationship between Pakistan and the Taliban? Those are two key critical questions I should put today to the gentleman who is widely regarded as Pakistan's greatest expert on the Taliban, former senator and former president of Pakistan's Human Rights Commission, Afrasiab Khattak. Senator Khattak, let's start with the new government announced by the Taliban on Tuesday evening. How do you view this caretaker government?
Thank you, Karan Saab, for having me. Well, Taliban have not disappointed people by excluding every non-Talib and non-Mullah from the cabinet. And they have really smashed the claims of their patrons in Pakistan and elsewhere who thought Taliban were changed and they would go for an inclusive government and they would change their policies. But I think they have shown that they are still the same Taliban as they were in 1990s, and they have not included anyone. And this exclusion has ignited resistance to them, both their armed resistance in Panjshir and the urban resistance led by women in Kabul and other cities of the country.
Let me pick up on some of the points you've made one by one. This is a 33-member government, but it is entirely Taliban. There are no women, there are no Shias. 30 out of the 33 are Pashtun. And according to the United Nations, at least 14 are on the United Nations sanctions list. How do you think the Afghan people will view this government?
First of all, let me point out that actually this combination or this proportion in the cabinet of Taliban represents the Taliban's body Taliban that exists in Pakistani religious seminaries. It's the same composition. And then the Taliban in their Pakistani sanctuaries where they're trained and sent to Afghanistan, it's the same composition. And last but not the least, Pakistani focus on Pashtun Taliban because they want to Talibanize Pashtuns to defeat Pashtun nationalism on both sides of the dividend line. So this is the explanation behind it. But then Afghans wouldn't really accept this. But the Taliban, like typical occupation militia, do not seem to even pretend to bother about Afghan public opinion or Afghan support for them, for their government, for their policies, for their cabinet. But as you have seen, people came out immediately after the announcement of the cabinet. Of course, there were other factors also for the agitation, but I think it's not a popular cabinet by any standard.
It's very interesting that you say that the formation of this government represents the Taliban who have been drawn from Pakistani madrasas. Analysts have pointed out that hardliners dominate the government. The more conciliatory Doha faction has been sidelined, and the Haqqani network alone seems to have grabbed 5 ministries. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I agree. And I think it's deliberate. It's not a coincidence. It is because, you see, Talibans are used basically as a demolition squad to demolish Afghan state and Afghan identity, bit by bit, limb by limb, brick by brick. You see, Taliban is basically an instrument of Pakistan's strategic depth in Afghanistan. You see, they represent sort of a force which is there to not to construct, but to deconstruct. So they don't need people who can reason, people who will be thinking people who would be open to reason, or open to accountability.
I'll pick up on the point you made about how the Taliban are the creation of the Pakistani state in a moment's time. But first, let me put to you one more question about the nature of government announced on Tuesday. So far, the Ministry of Women's Affairs does not exist, but the notorious Ministry for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice has been brought back. What message does that send both to the Afghan people as well as to the outside world?
It is part of the deconstruction. they want to push back Afghanistan to the Stone Age so that it is digestible to the hegemonists who have unleashed Taliban on Afghanistan. You see, all this direction that this government has taken, Taliban have taken in the last few weeks, clearly indicates their destination or their direction.
Now, let's come to the linkage between this government and the ISI to begin with. As you know, Pakistan's ISI chief, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, was present in Kabul for a couple of days just before the government was announced. Do you detect the hand of the ISI behind this new caretaker government?
Yes, of course. By visiting Kabul at this juncture, DGISI clearly demonstrated that Pakistan is prepared to give political ownership to this Taliban government. And that's what angered Afghan public opinion. That's why people went to Pakistani embassy. They raised slogans against Pakistan. Of course, people of Pakistan and Afghanistan have very good relations. I don't think there is anything between the people of the two countries. But of course, the government of Pakistan, Afghans resent the policies followed by successive government, but actually followed by Pakistani generals.
A moment ago, Senator Saab, you said that this government represents the Pakistani madrasa recruits who joined the Taliban. Has that happened specifically under the direction of the ISI chief? Is he the one who made sure that this government represents madrasa recruits from Pakistan? And also, this government has given at least 5 ministries to the Haqqanis who are close to the ISI. Has all of that happened under General Hamid's direction?
Actually, General Hamid is following what was started by General Ziaul Haq in 1980s. You see, Pakistan was part of the grand Western strategy to defeat Soviet Union in Afghanistan. But Pakistan had its own small strategy within that grand strategy, and it was the strategic depth. Now, it was not just military, it was also ideological. You see, Pakistani generals, Ziaul Haq, General Akhtar Abdur Rahman, accompanied by Jamaat Islami and Muslim Brotherhood and others from the Middle East, they tempered with Afghan identity, Afghan national identity. Afghans have been Muslims, majority of Afghans have been Muslims for the last 1,000 years. They were Afghan Muslims. You see, these guys exaggerated the Muslim part of the identity, not for the love of Islam, but to weaken the Afghan part, to weaken the Pashtun part. And that's what Taliban have been created or supported for. You see, when Taliban entered Kabul in 1996, September 1996, what did they do? What were the first steps that they took? They renamed Radio Kabul as Voice of Sharia. Now, Radio Islamabad is not Voice of Sharia. Radio Tehran is also not Voice of Sharia, but Radio Kabul was renamed. Similarly, they banned Afghan national flag. They banned Afghan national anthem. They banned Nowruz, 5,000 years old festival. They banned Jirga, the most important social institution of Pashtuns. They said in Sharia, you can't have Jirgas. They killed Dr. Najibullah, the great Afghan leader who had resigned from presidency to have peace in Afghanistan and who worked very hard for reconciliation in Afghanistan, a man with insight. But you see, he stood for an independent Afghanistan, a strong Afghanistan. Similarly, they demolished Buddha. Everything that represented Afghaniyat or Afghanhood was demolished, was attacked. It was not a coincidence. They were programmed for it.
Absolutely. And this was the intention, you say, of the Pakistan ISI from the days of General Zia, to demolish the identity of Afghans as Afghans, but emphasize instead in its place their identity as Muslims. And therefore, Afghan traditions, Afghan culture were demoted underneath an Afghan Muslim identity. But let me tell you, does the ISI believe that now, with this new caretaker government, which is basically, as you said, made up of representatives from Pakistani madrasas, have they achieved their dream of strategic depth? Is this what they think they've secured?
I think they are gloating. There are cheerleaders in Pakistan who are supporting Taliban's ascendancy in Kabul. But I think what really has sort of energized them is the international climate. It's because of the new Cold War, which is emerging in our region between the US and China. You see, the US sort of withdrew from the plan to stabilize Afghanistan because it thought, US was thinking that China and Russia have benefited by stability in Afghanistan. So for Pakistan, it was an opportunity to impose Taliban in Afghanistan because the US has stopped opposing Taliban.
Okay, let me put this to you. On the day the ISI chief visited Kabul, this is what you wrote in your article. The high-profile Kabul visit by DG ISI represents the public ownership by the Pakistan security state of the Taliban's invasion of Afghanistan. Can you briefly explain to an Indian audience, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by public ownership by the Pakistan security state of the Taliban invasion of Afghanistan?
Because before the recent military campaign of Taliban, Pakistani state would deny Taliban's presence in Pakistan, would deny Pakistan's support for Taliban. They would say Pakistan has no favorites in Afghanistan. They would say they have acted against Afghan Taliban, etc. But now they don't say that. They really proudly claim that Pakistan brought them to the table and Pakistan supported them in the recent campaign. So it is the type of ownership that they have now publicly started giving to Taliban, which they did not do in the past. But I also had written in the same piece that this policy will not endear Pakistan to Afghans, common Afghans. And I think these demonstrations have proved what I had said in my analysis.
Let's for a moment, Senator Saab, talk about the broader relationship between the Taliban and Pakistan. On August the 17th, you wrote, the Taliban militia was the most allied ally of the Pakistan army. On the 6th of September, you said Taliban leaders were the most allied allies of Pakistan. What exactly does that amount to? Can you explain?
Yes, actually, we have always supported the best of relations between Pakistan and Afghanistan. But for that, you have to befriend a country. You have to befriend the state. You have to befriend the whole people, the entire people of Afghanistan. But you see, Pakistani policy has been to adopt one of the groups. In 1980s, Pakistan supported Gulbuddin Hikmatyar's Hizb-e-Islami. It was Pakistan's favorite. But in 90s, Pakistan ditched that party and adopted Taliban. Now, Pakistan's support has been focused on Taliban, and it has excluded all other Afghans from its friendship. And it has made systematic efforts to impose Taliban on Afghanistan. You see, how could Taliban exist for 21 years without their sanctuaries in Pakistan, without consistent and systematic Pakistani support for them?
And within the Taliban, is the Haqqani network the favorite faction of the ISI? Admiral Mullen, yes, if you recall, once said that the Haqqanis were the veritable arm of the ISI. Would you agree that the Haqqanis are the chosen favorites?
Yes, actually, Jalaluddin Haqqani came to Pakistan along with some other Afghan leaders in 1974. And he and his family have had a permanent residence in Waziristan after that. 1974, far before the Soviet army captured, invaded Afghanistan. So you see, most of his sons actually have born in Pakistan. They have grown up in Pakistan. And you see, all their efforts, all their activities have been supported by Pakistani government and state. Unlike Taliban Shura in Quetta, which come from Kandahar, originate from the Greater Kandahar, which is called Greater Kandahar, the southwestern Afghanistan. Yes, they are a bit different from Haqqanis. They sort of regard themselves as people from Kandahar, religious people of Kandahar who have claimed to sort of political leadership or ownership. But Haqqanis are just the product of Pakistani security state, the Haqqani network.
Tell me something. Could the Taliban have swept so swiftly and so dramatically to power in Kabul without considerable logistical and military assistance from the ISI? And what sort of assistance did they get?
You see, first of all, the question is, which religious seminary would teach students to fight against 140,000 US and NATO troops with all modern gadgetry? Which seminary would teach Taliban or religious students of religious seminary to fight in 34 provinces simultaneously? All this coordination, all this military strategy cannot be really evolved or implemented without professional support. And this professional support is Pakistan Army. Which other force will be supporting Taliban in this way?
So in a sense, I'm quoting now Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of Britain's MI6. He said that what has happened in Afghanistan is a Pakistani invasion fronted by the Taliban. You sound as if you agree with that.
As I already said, Taliban is an instrument of Pakistani strategic depth. And I think their mission is to deconstruct. And I think Pakistan believes that later on they might go for other Mujahideen leaders or people who were supported previously by Pakistan. But Taliban is, of course, an instrument of Pakistani policy.
Tell me something. Did the Pakistani military play a role in the defeat of the resistance in Panjshir in the last 10 days? Was there Pakistani drones or Pakistani air support that was available to the Taliban?
I really don't have information about this, accurate information about this. I know generally that Pakistan has been supporting Taliban, but I really do not have any specific information about events in Panjshir.
Now, 5 days ago, the British paper, the Sunday Times, on Sunday the 5th reported, and I'm quoting the paper, that Pakistan has offered to train an army of an estimated 70,000 Taliban and at least 100,000 previously NATO-trained forces. If that's true, not only will Pakistan be extremely politically influential in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, but they will also be militarily very important.
That is what strategic depth is all about. You see, to reshape Afghanistan as a country, as a state, as a nation even. You see, this religious extremism is meant to reshape Afghan nationhood. So Pakistani military or Pakistani generals want to recast Afghanistan in their image. So it is that part. But you see, this is something bad for Pakistan. Afghans will never accept this. It will sort of start a new confrontation between the two countries. You see, physical force cannot really demolish Afghan identity of thousands of years, of centuries. So it is suicidal. It's bad for Pakistan.
As you already mentioned, Senator Khattak, on 2 or 3 occasions, there have been popular protests, mainly in Kabul, but also in Herat and other cities, against Pakistani involvement behind the Taliban. Do these protests have a future? Can they seriously worry the Taliban, or is it only a matter of time before they are brutally repressed?
You see, they will be repressed, and Talibans are good at that. But you see, this repression cannot hold an entire people hostage. It's sort of like hijackers hijacking a plane and trying to hold it for perpetually. Of course, I am confident it can't go on indefinitely. Afghans will resist, and I don't think the world will be indifferent indefinitely. And of course, there will be regional polarizations, new alignments. You can already see that Iranian government is responding to violence in Panjshir publicly. And I don't think that the Central Asians can be indifferent. I saw yesterday videos of Tajiks in Tajikistan demonstrating against violence in Panjshir. So I think there will be new alignments, new polarizations, and our region is entering, actually it has sleepwalked into a new conflict.
Okay. What you're saying is that you cannot repress people forever, but this is a long fuse and it could take many years to burn. It's not something that's going to erupt in the immediate future. Is that right?
Yes, it is a long haul, but the way Taliban have not disappointed us in their government, I think in their policy towards terrorist groups, again, I think they wouldn't disappoint the world. Last time, you remember in 1990s, Afghanistan became the hub of international terrorism, and there were terrorist attacks in 4 continents, and most of them could be traced to Afghanistan, where the hub of terrorism was functioning. So it can happen again.
Absolutely. Let's in fact come to that, and let's approach this subject by first talking about the Haqqanis. The first question I want to ask you is this: are the Haqqanis a full-fledged part of the Taliban, or are they only loosely allied? You know that the State Department, Ned Price, their spokesman, insists that the Taliban and the Haqqanis are separate entities. But Sirajuddin Haqqani is not just the deputy commander of the Taliban, he's also the new interior minister. So how would you describe the relationship between the Haqqanis and the Taliban?
You see, there are problems in their alliance or their unity. There are problems. You see, the way Kabul was captured by Haqqanis, they appeared first in Kabul, did not amuse Kandahari Taliban. And when they sort of accepted Gul Agha Sher Zoi, a Kandahari, in the Islamic Emirate, the Kandahari Shura or the Quetta Shura was not amused. So there are internal contradictions. Of course, Haqqanis are very close to Pakistan's security state, and their inclusion in the main body of politics sort of helps Pakistan to control the Taliban body as a whole. But there are problems in the ranks and in the leadership of Taliban movement at the moment.
Now, the Indian government believes, and has believed this for a very long time, that the Haqqanis are virulently anti-Indian. India believes that they are responsible for the attack on the Indian embassy in Kabul in 2008, when almost 60 people were killed. Today, when Sirajuddin Haqqani is the new interior minister, does that mean that the new Taliban government will be unfriendly to India?
You see, I don't think that Haqqanis have their own ideology or their own approach to regional politics. I think since they were very close to Pakistani security state, and Pakistan and India's relations were not good, I think that reflected in Haqqani's attitude towards India. But if things change between India and Pakistan, for example, I don't think the Haqqanis would be perpetual enemies of India. Haqqanis are not really a political party with a vision or with an ideology or with a long-term approach of their own.
You're making a very important point. The attitude the Haqqanis take to India simply reflects what they are told by the ISI and by the Pakistani state to do. Now, the interesting thing is, roughly 2 months ago, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, Pakistan's foreign minister, told Tolo TV that India's role in Afghanistan is larger than it ought to be. Does that mean that now that Sirajuddin Haqqani is the new interior minister, he will work to diminish India's role?
You see, Afghanistan's closeness to India has been a self-fulfilling dark prophecy in Pakistan. They put pressure on Afghan governments, and when the Afghan governments get closer to India, they say they are friends to India, and then a new confrontation starts. This is very unfortunate. As I said, Afghanistan is sort of become a victim of Pakistan-India polarization. And unfortunately, this polarization has worked, it has harmed Afghanistan.
But are you saying that the Haqqanis, are you saying the Haqqanis will try and diminish India's role and presence in Afghanistan? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, of course. Taliban as a whole, Haqqanis in particular, but Taliban as a whole, their Pakistani allies, they would definitely diminish India's role. But as I said, the Pak-India polarization should not really go to Afghanistan to polarize it in that way. I think if I've been saying it in Parliament, and I've been saying it here in seminars, that if Pakistan improves its policy towards Afghanistan, it changes its policy and recognizes Afghanistan as an independent country, I don't think India can compete with Pakistan for influence in Afghanistan because of the nature of relations, geography, history, culture, dependencies between the two countries. But you see, unfortunately, Pakistan does not improve its policy, and it sort of accuses Afghan governments without reforming its own policy.
Tell me this. We know that the Haqqanis are very anti-Indian. We know that that line is one that they get from the ISI directly. You've explained that. What about other factions of the Taliban, Stanik-Zai and Baradur? What is their attitude to India? What sort of relations would they like with New Delhi? It's been said, although not ever officially confirmed, that Stanik-Zai actually said to the Indians, don't withdraw your embassy, don't withdraw your diplomats, we'll protect you. So are people like Stanik-Zai and Mullah Baradar more accommodating towards India?
There are two aspects to it. First is Taliban have been, most of the time, they have been like a perpetual IRA without Sinn Féin. They didn't have any political branch. But the Doha office, in a way, provided them with some opportunity for political interactions with other countries. And it sort of introduced people like Stanik-Zai, Mullah Baradar, and that's why in this cabinet they have been pushed back, because they sort of learned a few things about regional and international politics during the last 2 years interactions, and they sort of developed an opinion which probably was not really appreciated here in Islamabad.
You made a very important point there. You said that the Taliban, for many years until the Doha talks began, was like the IRA without the Sinn Féin, the Sinn Féin being the political arm of the IRA. And the Doha talks have now shown that the Sinn Féin element, the Doha talks element, is irrelevant. Power has gone back to the military base, the original IRA, the military base of Taliban.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And I also wanted to add to it that, you see, Mullah Baradar being a Popalzai, Durrani, has this in his mind. I mean, that's what motivated him to start dialogue with Mr. Hamid Karzai, for which he was arrested in Pakistan. And he spent long years, almost a decade, in prison, in custody here. So he is different. So the new prime minister is different because he is not into these political things. He is simple Talib or Mullah. So I think that's also one of the factors which stopped Mullah Baradar from becoming the prime minister.
So is your advice to the Indian government, don't look for an immediate relationship with Taliban, wait and watch. This is not the moment to take any initiative. Is that your advice to Delhi?
Yes, you see, I have been asking all governments in the world to not recognize Taliban unless they are prepared to have a constitution. You see, how can you have a government without a constitution?
Absolutely.
They don't.
I'll come to that in a moment's time. But let's stick for a moment to the sort of relationship India can expect or want to hope to have with the Taliban. You've explained in your writings how the Taliban have connections with groups like Al-Qaeda, ETIM, and Tehreek-e-Taliban-e-Pakistan. What sort of relationship does the Taliban have with Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Toiba?
I think they do have close relations with these two organizations, but in particularly Lashkar-e-Taiba, which has been supporting the Taliban, particularly for training and other support programs on a large scale. But you see, I think Pakistan and India would have to reconcile, to change the nature of the relationship. They can't really go indefinitely for these zero-sum policies towards each other. I think we need regional cooperation, regional sort of relationship in South Asia. This new Cold War, I think Pakistan and India have to beware of becoming partners in alliances against each other.
But the very important point you're making, Senator Khattak, is that India's relationship with the Taliban cannot really be established until India's relationship with Pakistan changes. There will be a veto from Islamabad and the ISI given directly to the Taliban. And therefore, if India wants to start a relationship with Afghanistan under Taliban rule, it must start by improving its relationship with Islamabad, because the veto or the remote control is in Islamabad's hands, it's in ISI hands. That's the critical point you're making.
That's quite evident. You see, Taliban is not a free agent. It's not really a movement, a genuine political movement. I think it has very close relations with Pakistan, and I think it's an open secret by now.
We're coming to the end of this interview, Senator Khattak. Let me touch upon one other thing. Is this a new Taliban, a changed Taliban, as Zabiullah Mujahid's statements initially seemed to suggest? Or is the Taliban very cleverly using rhetoric to suggest it's changed, but actually it remains the same old, rigid, obscurantist, fundamental organization? Which of the two? Has it changed, or is this a deception?
It has not changed. It's a deception. And the deception is also confined to Kabul, the capital, where the world is watching them. In the provinces, they are killing people. In Badakhshan yesterday, they opened fire on a women protest, killing 2 women. And they're doing it, all these things in other provinces. In Kabul, they're pretending, but even in Kabul, you see, they have today, they removed the name of Mr. Hamid Karzai from the airport. The signboards were removed. You see, so they are deconstructing Afghanistan without any explanation, without any political logic. As I said, it's a force for deconstruction. And maybe they may be removed at some stage, but after a lot of damage that they would have caused to Afghanistan and its people.
Now, it's very interesting you say this is just deception. This is rhetoric being used by Zabiullah Mujahid to create an impression, but the impression is false. The Taliban remain exactly what they were. They remain rigid, they remain fundamental, they remain obscurantist, they remain anti-women. As you said, they're deconstructing. The problem they'll face is that the Afghanistan they've come to power in 2021 is a very different country to the one they ruled in the late 1990s. I'm told almost 2/3 of the population were born after 2001. The median age is 18. And this young generation of Afghans have grown up accustomed to television, democracy, social media, gender equality. Are the Taliban aware and conscious of this? Or are they simply ignoring it regardless of the reality staring them in the face?
I think they are ignoring it. They're trampling over the reality. But I think Afghans would not really put up with it. I'm very confident. A new generation of Afghans have come up. There are millions of young people. Many of them are educated. In 2016, I went to Kabul and I participated in a seminar over the outstanding Pashto poet Ghani Khan. And when we looked in the hall, I looked back, the hall was full, and many of them were the old Mujahideen who were trained in Pakistani madrasas, to get alienated from Afghan nationalism and from Afghan identity. But all of them were sitting there and enjoying Ghani Khan's poetry because they were Afghans after all. It was in their DNA. I don't think this brainwashing of 100,000 Taliban can really change Afghan nation as a whole, a nation of 35 million plus people. So I think this is doomed to fail, but it can take this region into new wars, new conflicts, and it can cause damage to Afghanistan, the region, and the world.
You're making a very important point. You're saying, despite the attempt being made to deconstruct Afghanistan's identity, something you say that the Taliban are doing specifically at the behest of the Pakistani state and the ISI. What will eventually, you believe, over a period of time, become the insuperable problem is that Afghanistan's Afghan identity will eventually assert itself again. And that will be the barrier that will check the Taliban, and it will also therefore check the ISI, the reassertion of Afghan identity. Is that right?
Yes. You see, this Afghan national flag, it is not only loved, rather worshipped by the young generation of Afghans. Millions of Afghans watching cricket matches over TV. You see, these young people are the face of new Afghanistan, even if many of them had to leave the country. But wherever they are, Afghanistan is there. You saw demonstrations by Afghan diaspora in Europe, Australia, Europe, and other countries and continents. So I don't think Afghan nationalism is going to disappear by Talibanization. And
the only thing is, Senator Saab, it could take many years, maybe even a decade or more, to be able to fight back. It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
No, but I have a bit different idea about it, because you saw Corona, you see this pandemic. In a globalized world, Talibanization in one country can harm the entire world. So I think the world will have to respond to it, to the threat, to the challenge. So I don't think it will take that long, even not like what it took in 1990s.
Okay, one last question. The Taliban repeatedly insist that this is a caretaker, an interim government. Do you have any sense of what sort of final political system they want? Or is that completely unknown?
You see, as far as Taliban are concerned, I think many of them even are not really properly educated about Islam. But some of them who have studied religion, I think they are inspired by, many of them are inspired by Al-Qaeda's ideologues. They are against modern state. That's why they insist on this emirate, this name, symbolism of this name. They don't believe in this trichotomy of state, this modern checks and balances, accountability, etc. So I think they really don't have a clear idea. Of course, I learned recently that there were suggestions made to them about 1964 constitution, which was adopted under King Zahir Shah. It was for constitutional monarchy. It was suggested to Taliban that their emir can take the place of the monarch, and in a way they can have their theocracy under the garb of 1964 constitution, saying, and they can also claim that it is an Afghan constitution, Afghan made in Afghanistan. So it can give them some respectability. So these are suggestions, but I don't think they have totally internalized these suggestions.
Absolutely. You wrote about this on the 25th of August, just 15 days ago. And in that article, you said, and I'm quoting you, the Pakistani deep state, I presume that means the ISI, the Pakistani deep state is persuading the Taliban to bring their Islamic emirate under the cover of the 1964 Constitution of Afghanistan for making it acceptable to the international community. In other words, the advice coming from the ISI is put yourselves under the 1964 Constitution, make the Emir the king. In other words, Hebatullah Akhundzada, presumably the supreme leader, will become king. And that will be an Afghan constitution, because it goes back to the days of King Zahir Shah, and B, it would provide some legitimacy and respectability in international eyes. But this is the advice you believe being given by the ISI.
Yes, as I said, Taliban themselves do not believe in modern state system. And they don't really believe in modern world, the way the word is. You see, the first thing they said, music is banned in 2021. Saying this, I mean, you can imagine what is coming to Afghanistan in other fields of life. So I think they don't really buy modern constitutionalism unless there is pressure from Pakistan.
And this is the pressure from Pakistan. The constitution that you should put yourselves under is the 1964 constitution. That is the advice from ISI. Am I right?
Yes, actually, they would like to replace the constitution which was adopted after Bonn Conference. I believe that was a very good constitution, and it was very Islamic in the sense that it sort of had accepted Islam as guiding principle.
Right, sir. But the Bonn constitution now is clearly out of the window, and the advice from the ISI is replace it with King Zahir Shah's constitution. That is the advice. We don't know whether it will be accepted by Taliban, but that's the advice from the ISI.
True. That is what we have heard here in Islamabad.
Thank you very much indeed, Senator Khattak. I'm deeply grateful for the time you've given me and for the details with which you've explained the relationship between the Taliban and Afghanistan. And in particular, your firm belief, which you repeated many, many times, and I think I'm quoting you, that the Taliban is an instrument of Pakistani strategic depth seeking to deconstruct Afghanistan. And the idea is to try and diminish, if not obliterate, the Afghan side of the country's identity and superimpose upon it only an Islamic identity. And you believe that over time, and maybe a lot faster than happened in the 1990s, that Afghan identity will reassert itself, and that will be the end of the Taliban. I thank you for this interview, Professor Senator Khattak. Take care, stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you.